You are walking alone across the African savannah. A lion is silently watching you through the tall grass. Then suddenly other silhouettes appear right behind you. The predator didn't suddenly shrink. You didn't magically grow any faster. And yet in that exact split second, attacking you is no longer an easy meal. A full-grown lion could easily overpower and take down a human being in a matter of seconds. So why would one of the most powerful apex predators in Africa freeze, hesitate, and think twice before attacking a group of almost entirely unarmed people? The answer isn't about courage. It is about a cold calculation of risk. Alone, a human being is just a slow, clawless creature with frustratingly small teeth. But when gathered together in a group, our ancestors transformed into something the savannah had never seen before. A prey animal capable of organizing a coordinated counterattack. For a wild predator, choosing the wrong target means facing starvation. But choosing to attack a cohesive group of humans could lead to a fate far worse than an empty stomach, a blinded eye, a shattered leg, or a permanent disability that ruins the ability to hunt forever. For millions of years, our ancestors stared out into the darkness with deep, primal fear of the great cats. But at some point along our evolutionary journey, those apex predators began looking back at humans with profound caution. Imagine a late prehistoric afternoon. You are walking across an open grassy plain, carrying a bundle of roots, scraps of scavenged meat, or a few sharp stone flakes. The dry grass rustles slightly, even though there isn't a breath of wind in the air. Two glowing eyes appear through the dense vegetation. The lion is crouched low to the ground. It doesn't roar. It doesn't charge immediately. It just watches. To the predator's mind, you look like an exceptionally viable target, smaller than most herbivores, drastically slower than a gazelle, lacking horns, lacking hooves, and possessing no obvious protective armor or claws. Then, stepping out from behind you, 4 other figures emerge. One lifts a thick, broken tree branch high into the air. Another bends down and scoops up a heavy, jagged rock. A third begins to shout, echoing a sharp, guttural warning across the open plain. The massive predator stands motionless for a few seconds, and then quietly steps back, melting away into the dense brush without a single drop of blood being shed. What exactly changed inside the mind of that apex predator? We tend to have a very simplistic assumption that wild lions suddenly became afraid of human beings. But nature doesn't operate on simple sentiment. Wild predators do not recklessly attack every living creature they are capable of killing. Every single hunt is an unforgiving economic transaction of energy and risk, the massive caloric cost of the chase, the probability of the prey escaping, and the danger of absorbing kicks, horned thrusts, or defensive bites. But the most terrifying risk of all is an incapacitating injury. For a wild animal operating in an unforgiving ecosystem, an injury that seems minor today is an absolute death sentence tomorrow. A swollen, sprained paw means it can no longer sprint after prey. A bleeding, damaged eye destroys the depth perception needed for an ambush. A fractured jaw means it will slowly and painfully starve to death in total helplessness. In the brutal reality of the wilderness, winning a fight does not mean you will survive the consequences of it. So the real question isn't, why were lions afraid of humans? The correct question is, why was attacking a group of humans such a terrible evolutionary gamble for a lion? Let's travel back to a fading twilight thousands of years ago. A band of early hominids is moving along the shoreline of a lake. The sun is sinking below the horizon. A few individuals bend down to forage on the ground, while others carry supplies, their eyes constantly scanning the tree line and the brush. Children and smaller, more vulnerable members are carefully positioned right in the center of the formation. The tension in the air rises with every passing minute because dusk is the golden hour for ambush predators. Modern wildlife data from Africa demonstrates that lions become exceptionally dangerous after sunset. In comprehensive tracking of lion attacks across Tanzania, The vast majority of tragedies occurred during the darkest hours of the night, when the absence of light stripped away the human advantage of visual detection. Those early humans didn't need a modern spoken language or complex grammar to communicate the danger. They only needed subtle shifts in body language, sharp clipped vocal alerts, a synchronized gaze pointed toward the brush, a tightening of their physical formation, and their largest, strongest individuals stepping outward to form a protective perimeter. Before they could even think about defeating an apex predator in physical combat, their very first survival step was ensuring that the predator could never get close without being seen. And this was their primary line of defense, multiple pairs of eyes, destroying the ambush. When you are alone in the wilderness, your attention is desperately divided across too many vital tasks: scanning the ground for food, watching your footing on uneven rocks, carrying your supplies, and trying to monitor the tree line. But inside a group, these cognitive burdens are distributed effortlessly. While one person bends down to dig, another is standing upright, scanning the horizon. The moment a single individual notices an unnatural twitch in the grass, their sudden flinch or vocal warning instantly triggers the heightened alertness of the entire group. In that exact fraction of a second, the lion is stripped of its most devastating evolutionary weapon, the element of surprise. An ambush only succeeds when the target realizes the danger, when it is already too late. A cohesive human group brings overlapping cones of vision that cover every possible angle. Once detected, the massive cat is no longer looking at an oblivious, unprotected back. It is suddenly staring into a wall of sharp, focused eyes, locked directly onto its position. One person might miss the lion, but the lion had to remain invisible to all of them if it wanted an easy kill. The second defensive mechanism lies in how a tightly knit group eliminates isolation. In the natural world, master predators constantly look for the separated outlier. A lagging individual, a wandering child, an injured straggler, or someone crouching down carelessly in the shadows. But a dense, coordinated formation of humans seals up those gaps, making it exceptionally difficult for a lion to isolate a clear, vulnerable target. When the entire group turns to face the threat together, the predator no longer sees a collection of small, disconnected bodies. It faces an unbroken, unpredictable wall of flesh and bone. Solid solidarity transformed weak, fragile individuals into an intimidating, unified barrier. But how did those relatively small bodies project enough hesitation to paralyze a beast weighing hundreds of pounds? That is where the third mechanism comes into play: noise, size, and orchestrated confusion. A single human standing still is physically unimposing in the wild. But multiple humans simultaneously waving their arms, raising long branches, flailing animal hides, clashing rocks together, and screaming at the top of their lungs is a completely different psychological story. They step forward together, advancing a few aggressive paces toward the tree line. Their goal was never necessarily to kill the lion in physical combat. Their sole objective was to generate a chaotic wall of sensory overload, a spectacle so loud, large, and confusing that it forced the predator's brain to abort the attack sequence. The human group didn't actually need to be physically stronger than the lion. They only needed to convince the unarmed that the price of this meal was absurdly overpriced. We don't have historical manuals proving our ancestors used a universally standardized technique to scare off predators. But these actions are entirely logical, grounded in collective human cognition, physical morphology, and direct parallels to how other social primates defend themselves against carnivores. And this brings us to the profound evolutionary divide that separated a human group from a standard herd of grazing herbivores. We were a prey species that learned to fight back. Most animals in the wild will instinctively scatter and flee in blind panic the moment an apex predator breaks cover. Humans sometimes fled too. But a coordinated human group had another unprecedented option, moving collectively toward the danger. Even the simplest unshaped rocks can cause severe blunt force trauma when thrown with high velocity by a human arm. Long tree branches and digging sticks extended the defensive perimeter, putting precious feet of distance between human flesh and a predator's jaws. sharpened wooden points and cutting tools, as they eventually emerged in our technological history, drastically escalated the physical stakes for any beast daring to leap into the fray. The predators simply couldn't calculate just how far this bizarre group of bipeds would go to inflict bodily harm. The danger wasn't just the physical object held in a human hand. The true danger was that dozens of those hands could act at the exact same time from multiple trajectories. Fossilized footprints discovered at Illoret in Kenya dating back roughly 1.5 million years provide an extraordinary glimpse into this reality. The trackways reveal that groups of Homo erectus, including multiple adult males, were walking together across the exact same landscape. While footprints cannot explicitly tell us whether they were actively hunting or defending themselves, scientists view these tracks as compelling physical evidence of growing social cooperation and group mobility during the early dawn of humanity. This leads us to the most fascinating psychological twist of all. What the lion truly feared was not human muscle power, but our sheer unpredictability. An experienced lion understands the behavioral scripts of almost every prey animal on the savannah. It knows the rigid, hardwired patterns by heart. A gazelle will bolt. In a high-speed sprint, a buffalo might lower its horns. For a frontal charge, a zebra will unleash a bone-shattering hind kick, and a young calf will blindly run toward its mother. But human beings react in ways that defy fixed biological scripts. We might run, but we might also scream and circle-throw projectiles, charge forward with sticks, form a defensive shield around a wounded comrade, or even actively stalk and relentlessly pursue the predator itself. That chaotic variability paralyzes the decision-making circuits of a wild carnivore. A predator survives by reading and predicting natural patterns. Our ancestors survived by breaking and shattering those patterns. However, we must never make the mistake of viewing lions as simplistic or unintelligent beasts. Because lions are also highly sophisticated social animals, and they are absolute masters of cooperative hunting. The prehistoric survival struggle was never a simple one-sided cartoon of clever humans versus mindless beasts. It was a high-stakes evolutionary chess match between two social species continuously evaluating and testing each other's collective capabilities. A coordinated pride of hunting lions was infinitely more lethal than a lone, wandering straggler. By the same token, the human collective advantage evaporated in an instant if our formation broke in panic. If an individual wandered away from the fire, if the entire camp fell asleep without sentries, if the surrounding bush was too dense, or if the pride of lions was driven by starvation to ignore their usual caution. There was strength in numbers, but numbers alone never turned the prehistoric savannah into a completely safe paradise. And the Achilles heel of every collective defense system was darkness. During the day, natural light gave humans superior vision, rapid communication, and early reaction times. But once the sun dropped below the horizon, those advantages were stripped away. Even within a familiar campsite, people eventually had to sleep. Someone might step into the dark to relieve themselves, or a guard might mistake the stealthy approach of a paw for the gentle rustle of the wind. As modern wildlife research in Tanzania reveals, lions capitalize on total darkness to maximize their hunting success against humans. A cohesive group was a formidable fortress, but only as long as they remained awake, unified, and sensory aware of the surrounding threat. That is why the eventual mastery of controlled fire became such a monumental turning point in human evolution. Fire was not the sole explanation for our survival, but it acted as a massive amplifier of our collective defense. For populations that learned to command it, a hearth provided illumination to push back the shadows, smoke to mask scents, burning branches that could be wielded as unpredictable weapons, and most importantly, a central bright anchor that kept the group gathered tightly together. Fire didn't invent human cooperation. It simply made a cooperating human group significantly harder to ambush. When you grasp the full scale of this ancient life-or-death struggle, you begin to realize something extraordinary about your own body and mind today. Think about how you feel when you are walking alone down a dark, empty street at night. You hear footsteps echoing rapidly behind you. Your heart rate instantly spikes. Your breathing sharpens. You instinctively look for a well-lit area. You seek out the presence of other people, and you feel an immediate, overwhelming sense of relief the moment you step into a bright, crowded room. Today, the threat behind you is probably not a lion stalking through the grass, but the ancient alarm system wired deep inside your nervous system is still running its original survival script. Your brain registers darkness, isolation, unfamiliar sounds, and the absence of your tribe. And your body automatically translates those inputs into an alert of mortal danger. It is very likely that the reason you feel so deeply secure in the company of others is because across countless generations of human existence, being left completely alone in the dark really was the fastest way to become prey. This opens up a much deeper philosophical question about our evolutionary story. Popular narratives love to paint our early ancestors as proud, dominant hunters ruling over the natural world from day one. But the scientific reality is far more humbling and complex. For immense stretches of our history, hominids were also vulnerable creatures fighting for survival in the middle of the food chain, living under the constant shadow of apex carnivores. A detailed fossil analysis of Homo habilis remains from Olduvai Gorge revealed tooth puncture marks on bone that perfectly match the bite of a leopard. It is a stark, sobering reminder that the early pioneers of our genus were actively hunted by large predatory cats. So in the end, did human cooperation evolve primarily to help us hunt down larger animals? Or did it begin from a desperate primal need to stop larger animals from hunting us? There is probably no single answer. Collective cooperation was the ultimate survival toolkit for a dozen different challenges: spotting predators, guarding infants, defending scavenged carcasses, driving off rivals, hunting game, transporting resources, and nursing the sick and wounded. Yet one thing is certain. Perhaps we didn't just become human on the day we learned to fashion weapons and hunt together. Perhaps we truly became human on the day we decided we would no longer run away alone, choosing instead to stand shoulder to shoulder against the wild darkness. Cave Curious is a YouTube channel dedicated to exploring the fascinating science and history of ancient humanity, wild animals, and prehistoric life. If you love uncovering the strange evolutionary roots behind human behavior and survival, hit that subscribe button and join the Cave Curious community. There are still many pieces of our primal past watching us from the dark.